Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard brought to you by our sponsor, The Great Game of Business. I'm Lauren Feldman, and I'm here with Gene Marks. Welcome, Gene.
Hello, Lauren. How are you?
I'm good. Great to have you back. So, Gene, you recently wrote a piece proclaiming that this is the era of the worker. And in particular, you noticed the increased number of strikes. Tell me about the piece. What prompted that?
First of all, I just want to say, I don't want to get political here because it's not that so much. I mean, clearly you read the news, everybody knows there's a lot of strikes. I mean, the levels of strikes have reached very, very high levels compared to prior periods. Actors are striking, truck drivers are striking, baristas are striking, Amazon workers are striking. I mean, it's all over the place. So, the question is why and what, and the answer is kind of obvious. I mean, if you have a pro-worker administration, and this government, the administration is very pro-worker and very pro-union. There are a lot of states around the country, that are blue states, California, Illinois, New York, very pro-worker, very pro-union. It creates an environment where if you're in a union, you're like, hey man, this is the time to take advantage and get some money because we're going to have backing from the government, or at least they'll give us moral support and they won't get in our way. I mean, you remember when Reagan took office and, the airline, the
air traffic controllers.
Yeah. And he fired them all. That kind of set the stage. You know what I mean?
It sets a different tone. That's for sure.
Sets a different tone. It's the opposite tone now. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying it's a fact.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, clearly it is a fact. I think it's a fact that Joe Biden would happily agree to. I think he's proclaimed himself the most pro-union president ever. But do you really think that has that big an impact? I mean, I'm sure they appreciate the moral support, but the argument the auto workers, for example, are making is that we gave a lot of givebacks during the Great Recession. Since then, profits have soared. Our wages haven't. It's time for us to be repaid for that. Isn't that more of a factor than the tone in the White House?
You just said the right word. It's time for us. I mean, if they didn't have the type of administration that was in place right now, perhaps it might not have been time for them. They might have had to take a step back if they knew. I mean, everything in life is timing. And if they were going to institute some type of a strike, where they did not, they had the people at the highest levels of government talking, calling out against them and sentiments around the country that was not very pro-worker, pro-union. It wouldn't have been a good time to strike. But now that's not the case. I mean,
well, a lot of other things have changed too. I mean, the economy has changed, yes. And the employees, as you point out, employees are clearly in a stronger position than they were before the pandemic.
Yeah, it's good timing. I mean, I guess that's just my point, is that the timing is right for doing this. The climate, the political climate is right for doing this. I mean, listen, if Biden loses the next election and a Republican comes in, but whether it's Trump or somebody else, I mean, it would be a harder battle for them, regardless of how the economy is going or what their wages are. It would just be a harder battle. But now they know they need to strike while the iron is hot. Strike literally while the iron is hot. And that's what they're doing. And
well, let me ask you this. Do you see this as a small business issue? Do you see this in, unions and strikes affecting the kinds of businesses that are your clients?
It's a really, really good question. And really, I see it more. I mean, listen, it depends on how you define a small business. I mean, the Small Business Administration defines anybody with less than 500 employees. So, maybe if you've got hundreds of employees, you're more exposed to unionization, or having a union than others. But now, for the most part, I don't think it is much of a small business issue. The only impact that it does have on small businesses is look at the impact that it had in Hollywood when you have the actors strike. You have restaurants and services and companies that service these an industry that's kind of shut down. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So, the auto worker strike that's going on right now is a perfect example. I mean, there are a lot of small businesses that are, having their orders, pulled back or stopped because there's no production going on. So it has that sort of, trickle down effect to other businesses. That's the main impact that it has.
You do kind of take a shot at the workers at the end by implying, artificial intelligence is coming and hundreds of millions of jobs are going to be lost, and you be careful what you ask for.
According to some studies. Yeah. Yeah. It's, listen, I have to tell you something, Lauren. I do a lot of speaking to a lot of associations, and just this past month, I've spoken 6 or 8 times to different industry organizations, specifically on AI, for like an hour on AI. These people in the audience are hungry to learn more about it and how it will help their business. And really, what they're saying is, how do we use this technology to not necessarily fire people, but to do the work that we can't find people to do, and ultimately to keep our workforce as lean and mean as possible. And I think that's what's coming. So my
don't you think everybody's going to do that regardless? I mean,
yeah, they are, which gets me back to my my advice for the union workers. I'm like, listen, I'm all about it. Like, I'm like, dude, if I was running a union or I was in a union, like, I'd be like trying to grab as much as I can right now, because not only is the environment good, but when you look out into the future and what certain technologies like AI is going to bring, that's going to really have a potential impact on jobs. So while you can get the money, it's important to get it.
All right, next topic. No matter how much you love your employees, there are times when you have to terminate one or more, whether it's because of economic conditions or because of poor performance. You recently wrote a piece kind of laying out some guidelines, things you should be thinking about if you have to do this. Tell us about that a little bit.
First of all, what drove me to write this in the Philly Inquirer, did this past week. There was a study that came out from a career services firm called Challenger Gray and Christmas, and they do other studies, and they, you would think with the hot job market and unemployment being so historically low that, there wouldn't be that many layoffs. But they say that layoffs right now, there was more than 600,000 layoffs this year, almost a 200% increase from the same period last year. They say that the number of corporate layoffs in this year is second only to 2009. I mean, that's pretty wild. There's a lot of layoffs going on.
Which has been hidden by the fact that the jobs reports have been really strong.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I think what it underlies is that companies, even as labor is tight, what I'm seeing out there is that companies and my clients, they're willing to pay for good people when they can get them. They're stepping up to do it when they can. And they're also willing to get rid of people that are just not productive or they're a drain on their on their profits. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in corporations. The best example is, not to go too much on a tangent, but it's like, I've been reading the Walter Isaacson book on Elon Musk. And Musk laid off like 85% of the staff at Twitter, was laid off, and there's been some blips in Twitter, but I'm a Twitter user every day, and I really don't really see any issues with it. Like, it's been mostly fine. I mean, maybe DeSantis might have a different opinion considering his.
I have a different opinion as well, but
okay. But I guess maybe 85% was too much, which is, by the way, what Isaacson concluded. But I guess my point is that there's a lot of fat to trim in a corporate environment, and I think corporations are knowing of that.
I think he's also facing some litigation there because apparently he didn't pay out money that was promised to some of those laid off employees. I don't know the facts of the case, but
which brings me to your original question.
Yes.
To the point of this conversation. So I'm like, okay, we're in an environment. If you are a small business, you need to lay somebody off. Like, what is like the right process for doing it so you don't get into trouble? I talked to a few attorneys. I wrote a piece for the Inquirer on this, and let me just give you a few of the takeaways, Lauren. Like, number one is you got to document, and you shouldn't just be document when you decide to lay somebody off or terminate them. It should be an ongoing process. I mean, by the time you get to terminate somebody, it should not be a surprise to that employee. You should have at least a system in place where if there's any infraction of rules or misbehavior or complaints or whatever, it gets documented either manually or in some, platform, some system, so that it's discussed along the way. And when the line is crossed, it should not be, a big, a surprise to that employee. So that's number one. Number two is when you are terminating.
Maybe that might be worth a further thought, because
sure,
in most cases, I mean, the employer has the right to fire an employee pretty much at will.
Yes.
So explain why it's so important to document reasons that would explain that firing.
Yeah, there's one word, and the word is discrimination. It's a highly politicized environment right now, and employees are smart, and if you're going to fire somebody who, I don't know, might have a potential health issue, or might have might be older, an older employee, or might be an employee of color. It's not so hard for that employee to be like, oh, you fired me because of race, or because of you discriminated against me because of my age or my gender. So, I'm not saying that an employee will prevail, but if you don't have any documentation to support the reason why you're terminating that employee, it makes it a lot harder for you to argue that case if it ever does go to court, which is why all the attorneys I talk to are like, you got to make sure you're keeping records. Does that make sense?
It does. Obviously, that's a termination for a reason. It's not a layoff because of economic conditions.
Correct.
Is there documentation that matters in a layoff situation?
Yeah, I mean, the only documentation is basically being able to prove that your layoff was because of economic reasons, and usually the documentation is your financial statements to back it up. Some of the other things, by the way, I just want to make sure I get in here is that I learned that obviously you should always have another party with you when you're having this termination meeting. You don't necessarily have to do it face to face. In fact, some of the attorneys I talked to were like, you're doing your employee a favor just by doing it over Zoom. I know some people are like, oh my God, that sounds so insensitive, but it's like, I don't know, making the person drive 45 minutes into work just to fire them. Can also,
and then having to, as someone who has been fired and then having to walk through the office,
sucks, right?
I can relate to that.
Yeah, you almost wish, so, and having another, party there to witness the conversation is important. One attorney, it was interesting, was saying that you should have an employee, if you're going to have that meeting face to face, it should be in a room where the employee has got free access out of the room. Like, you shouldn't be blocking their access out of the room. Like, whoa. And they're like, yeah, because it's kind of restraint and you don't know how somebody's going to react. And then they could accuse you of confrontation. I don't know. So, okay. So there's all of that. And then finally, there's, you do want to file that final document, which is sort of like your termination agreement. And, you're not allowed now, because of a recent ruling from the National Labor Relations Board, that you can't have contingent severance agreements. Some employers do that. Like, well, we'll pay you a severance, but you're not allowed to say this or do this after you leave this company forever, or else we have the right to get this money. You can't do any of that, but you can have a termination agreement, which lays out all the, what you're paying that employee. And that means unused vacation or any other benefits, and final payments, and then the employee should sign it, which gets us back to the Musk argument. Did he have those employees sign those agreements? Because when an employee signs that, they're basically saying like, yes, I confirm that this is what's owed to me, and I'm signing off on that. But if Elon Musk, which I don't know if they did or not, but if they didn't have the employees sign those agreements, then that definitely leaves them open to to questions.
Often those agreements in the past have had some kind of promise not to talk ill of the company.
Right.
I don't know can you still do that?
No. I mean, again, first of all, you can't make your severance contingent on that. That's what the agreements of the past was like. But now, right. Employees can leave and still talk ill about the company. They're free to do that. It's freedom of speech. So they're able to do it.
Interesting. All right. Last topic. You also wrote recently about how much you like Britain's national health system. We've talked about this before a little bit, but I want to go back into it. I guess what intrigues me about this is I agree with you 100% on what I think is your main argument for this. Your main argument, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it is just insane that we burden business owners with having to figure out how to provide health insurance for their employees. Am I right about that?
You are. That's one of the reasons why. And I knew you would agree with me because you're a liberal socialist, Warren.
Well, look, hey, this is your piece, socialist. Who are you calling socialist?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a burden on employers. I mean, and it is, I have client after client who have to struggle with, renegotiating their health insurance every year. It's a monopoly. I mean, let's admit it. It's like you get the same quotes from different insurance companies. You have to have a PhD in health insurance to figure out all the different plans, the networks, the deductibles, the, add-on for drug coverage or not, or dentist coverage or not. I mean, it's like,
and you have to offer it, whether it's one employee or a family of, with the employee.
Yeah. And then what happens as well, then you get into it and like if you have a health history in your company, the insurance agent, the insurance company raises your rates, and then you're like, why? And then I've seen it, they'll be like, well, you had that one employee that had, like liver cancer, and that was like a big problem. And and you're like, that's way too much information for me in this, era of HIPAA. Like, I don't need to know that, people don't want to know this stuff. So it's like, just why do employers have to go? And then finally in this country, it's like, we pay for health insurance as a small business. It's still not enough. I mean, the big companies out there are still offering way better benefits because they can afford it. So by having like a national health where everybody just pays in the same, it does, level the playing field. Now in England, companies can offer what's called BUPA or private insurance as an extra perk. Fair enough. But really for the most part, your small businesses and your large companies in England are, when it comes to health insurance, it's just not a competitive advantage,
Now, I should point out that you do acknowledge in this piece that everything isn't great with the National Health Service over there, and it has had some problems. It is taking some heat.
Yeah. I mean, my father-in-law, who's like 160 years old, had to go into the hospital like during the summer for like, a very minor broken bone in his head. No, I'm just kidding. In his leg. And he wound up spending 7 weeks in the hospital for it because while he was there were two strikes. There was a doctor's strike and a nurse's strike. Can you imagine? I mean, that stuff goes on all the time there, and they definitely have their issues on national health there. No question about it. Having said that, I mean, my mom, had to go in the hospital later, and it's been quite
here. This is here.
Yeah, in Philly, and and again, like. The healthcare workers there, it was inconsistent care that she was getting, and just getting, signed in and then signed out of the hospital. It's still a bureaucratic nightmare. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And you hear here, obviously people here in this country, they get slapped with enormous healthcare bills out of the blue, and it's tough.
So again, back to where we started, why the burden of this should fall on business owners, I will never understand. But what I really don't understand is why they don't rise up and fight it, which I think they should. And that's kind of my challenge for you. It's one thing to write a column about the health service in England. You're holding it up as an example. That's never going to sway minds here. People are not going to rise up and say that's what we want exactly the way they have it over there. But you could kind of lead the charge for something that absolves business owners of this responsibility here in this country. Why don't you do that?
It's a good question. I mean, I could be doing a lot of things that are, and maybe I will. I know you're chuckling a little bit, but
no, I'm very serious. I'm with you on this. Yeah. I think it's an important cause. I've heard the pain in the voice of business owners who have to deal with this. It's hard enough to run a business without this concern, but to have this hanging over your head every year is insane. And I think if business owners got together and got behind a solution to this and, raised their voices, it would make a difference.
It would. I do agree with you. And as I get older, I do have plans, real, in all honesty, of picking up certain issues that impact businesses and really kind of, taking a stand and being an advocate for it. And this is definitely the one that leads the charge for it. All I can do right now in my schedule is like sort of write about it or talk about it and things like this.
Well, come up with your proposal.
Yeah.
Do that as a column. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and it's actually a very simple proposal, but it's just to expand Medicare. You know what I mean? I mean, it's really not that, it's not that hard.
Hey, there you go. You and Bernie Sanders agree.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my goodness. Did you just say that? Let's
end the conversation. And you just agreed. Gene, what should we be watching for this week from you? What's coming up?
So I'm going to write for Entrepreneur about ways businesses can take advantage of shrinkflation. And I've got some articles, some topics for the Inquirer that I need to write about that I'm thinking about doing related to Hispanic business owners is sort of leading my charge, but I've also got a few other things to think about. So a few things in the air I haven't decided yet until I put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. So I'll let you know.
But shrinkflation and how to, I guess it's a subtle way to raise prices.
It is, and I'm a big fan of it. I think it's a great, great way to manage your way around it. And the theme is less meatballs in your pasta. Who's going to know?
Is there a way that works for a business like yours, a consulting business?
It actually does. Yeah. I mean,
really?
in our business is a perfect example is we don't charge for travel time when we go to clients' locations, but maybe we should start doing that. Do you know what I mean? So certain things that were included before aren't necessarily included going forward. So things like that can work in a service business too. I'll have a bunch of ideas, I promise.
Interesting. I will look forward to that. Gene Marks is a CPA who writes weekly on small business for The Guardian, The Hill, The Philadelphia Inquirer, The Washington Times, The Chicago Daily Herald, Forbes, and Entrepreneur. You can also hear him on ABC Radio's Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Gene hosts two small business podcasts with Paychex Corporation and The Hartford. This episode was brought to you by The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to help build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you, Lauren. See you next week.
Have a great week, everyone.